Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Olivas and I'm going to walk you through the notebook for Module 3, Choose Your Format for Your Project. So as you know, we're working on a literacy project that has asked you to choose literacy that you're an expert in so that you can write about it and basically tell us more about it and how you are connected to it and what you care about. So for this notebook, you've been asked to choose your format for the final project. And what that means is we're going to pick a type of essay that you are going to go ahead and write. We have three options. The first is the analytical essay. Now, an analytical essay is very much like your typical kind of research essay. You're going to come up with a main point, you're going to support that point, and then you're going to give us a solid conclusion as to why that point is important, right? And then we have the narrative essay, which is where you're going to tell your story about your literacy, right? Finally, we have the instruction guide, which will help you, which is where you will help your reader to work step by step through a process of how they can become literate in your area. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about these more specifically. Let's start with the analytical essay. So when we talk about an analytical essay, what we're really talking about is the process of analysis. So what is analysis? An analysis is really the process of examining elements to better understand the whole, right? So thinking of it as a puzzle. You take a bunch of puzzle pieces, you look at them very closely, you figure out how they connect to each other, and then you have a big picture, right? So in this essay, you're going to explain to your reader how the most important elements of your literacy work together to create a bigger picture. So how do you do that? How do you analyze that literacy? Well, the first thing that you need to do is you need to figure out what you're actually analyzing. That means you need to know what your big picture is, right? So keeping with the puzzle piece, is your puzzle, when it's done, is it going to be a duck? Is it going to be a cake? Is it going to be, what is it? So for example, if my literacy is, let's say my literacy is gaming, then my puzzle, my big picture might be something along the lines of Dungeons and Dragons continues to influence tabletop gaming even to this point today or something, right? Or Dungeons and Dragons is one of the most important games in tabletop gaming. Something along those lines. So I have a big picture, right? That's really the thesis or that main idea. So then I need to figure out what parts I'm going to use to help my audience understand that big picture. In this case, let's say I'm looking at how Dungeons and Dragons influences tabletop gaming today. So I need the history of Dungeons and Dragons, right? We need to assume that my reader may not know much about it. So maybe we need to talk a little bit and do some research about when it started, how it started. I need to be able to explain to my reader how it connects to today's tabletop games. So maybe we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons and then something else that is popular now. And then finally, I need to explain that big connection. How is it influencing? How does one thing influence the other, right? So you need to decide on the elements or your big picture. You need to evaluate the pieces that are going to come together to show your big picture. And then you need to describe that big picture to the audience. In doing that, what elements of writing might you need for this essay, right? So first of all, you need your thesis or your main idea. So once again, let's say we're looking at gaming. Dungeons and Dragons continues to influence tabletop games today. Three specific elements, right? The history of, this is how Dungeons and Dragons started. Here is some of the things that still, what we can see that connection in. So if you look at this game that's popular today, you can still see the influences. And finally, a conclusion. This is why I think it still influences it. It was a great game. It brought people together. It did all of these things. And this is why it continues to influence. So that means for the analytical essay, you are going to need to do a little research. You're going to need to bring in some support for your opinions. So you're going to need to find information about each of your little pieces that helps to support your idea, that helps to show your reader that big picture. So you might look at an article about the history of Dungeons and Dragons. You might look at a review of a new game. You might look at maybe a think piece on how Dungeons and Dragons is still really important to the gaming community. And then you would bring them in and use them to help your readers see the big picture, to get your main idea. And then you would end it with saying it's really important to, look at how a literacy has what's in its past, how it affects the future, how it has influences, right? And kind of focus on what that conclusion is, the so what, why is it important moment. Okay, so an analytical essay is going to ask you to really look at how those little pieces make up a big picture and to walk your reader through that. Now, the narrative essay is literally storytelling. You are telling me a story, right? And you're going to tell the audience some kind of a story about your literacy. This can be your origin story, how you first started gaming, it could be a story about why you chose gaming. It could be a story about something that happened while you were gaming last week. It just needs to be a story. So how do you narrate that literacy? Well, you've got to pick a story to tell, and then you have to focus on showing the reader that experience with your literacy, and finally you explain to the reader why the story is important. And what does that mean? What do you need? Well, most stories focus with I language. We use I language to talk about that time the first time I played Dungeons and Dragons, or the first time I played this tabletop game that I love. Then we need lots of sensory details. I need to know what things felt like, what things looked like, what things smell like. We want to show, not tell, right? That experience. And that also means you need action and dialogue. This happened, then this happened, and then this happened. And then the conversation within that. And it all comes up to a conclusion as to why it's important. So, for example, the first time I started gaming, the first game I ever played was, in my case, the first game I ever played, because I'm very old, was the original Super Mario Brothers on a gaming, what do they call them, platform. And, I was like 10 or 11, and my cousins had a Nintendo, and I was super jealous, and I never got to take a turn because I was the youngest. But what I did realize is that because I watched them play for so long, that when I did get to have my turn, I was really, really good at it, and everybody was super amazed. And then I actually, turned out that I was better at it than most of them because I was forced to sit and watch all 9 of my cousins play before I got a turn, right? So I language, this is your story. Tell us your story. Sensory details, sitting in my cousin's basement. It was always kind of muggy in there, and it kind of smelled like drywall and socks because my cousins were mostly boys. Action dialogue. We got into arguments, and then my aunt and uncle had to come down and tell us to behave. And it's all important because now, looking back, as both a reader and a writer and as a literate person in general, I still learn really well by watching the process, seeing things happen in front of me. Okay? So option 2, narrative essay, tell me a story. And finally, our instruction guide. Now, an instruction guide really is a step-by-step set of instructions that's going to guide your reader through a process. So beginning with your instruction guide, they should be able to start something and finish something when they have finished reading your guide. So, for example, how do you give instructions about your literacy? You have to choose a specific process or action. So I might choose, for my specific process, getting through a certain level in Mario Brothers. And right now I can't think of one, but, or something very specific like baking bread for the first time. If my literacy is baking, I might choose baking bread for the first time. And then you need to break that process up, or that action up, into at least 3 parts. So if I were to do, say, baking bread for the first time, I would break up my 3 parts into the ingredients I need, the tools I need, and then the step-by-step instructions for the recipe. So I might start by saying, okay, first, think about your ingredients. This is how you look for quality ingredients. These are the main tools that you're going to need, and here's what you can expect. So break up the process, baking bread for the first time, into 3 parts: ingredients, tools, action, right? The actual recipe. And then finally, each of those parts should have at least 3 steps. So choosing good ingredients, what to look for, what to avoid, where are some of the places that you shop. Tools, again, what to look for, what to avoid, where did you get your tools? And finally, the actual recipe. The first part of baking bread is bringing your wet ingredients together, then your dried ingredients, then your wet ingredients, putting them together. Here's what you can expect. So breaking that up into a step-by-step set of instructions that allows your reader to actually do a thing by the time they have finished reading your essay. Now, what elements of writing will that need? So that's going to need a lot of visuals, right? You want to describe things. You want to tell me that a all-purpose flour should look like this, and you shouldn't have any, big clumps, or it shouldn't be dry, or whatever it is. You want to be able to give me examples of how something is going to work. When you mix your yeast with water, this is going to happen, right? So visuals, descriptions, examples. You want to make sure that you can walk your reader through a process. So another example might be like playing your very first game of Dungeons and Dragons. You might break it up to building a character, how we actually play the game, so rolling the dice, things like that. And finally, how to move on to the next game or something along those lines. So the instruction guide is a process, right? Okay, so with this notebook, your goal is to decide what format you're going to use. You're going to explain to me and answer these questions and submit. So you're just going to explain why you've chosen what you've chosen and what kind of support you might need. So, for example, I've decided on an analytical essay about baking, and what I might need is some help finding good sources to write my essay, right? So that is what you're looking for with this particular notebook. So hopefully this has helped, and if you still need more information, go ahead and contact your instructor, and I'm sure that they can clarify any other questions that you might have.